Her pencil moved in total silence. For 5 minutes, the deaf girl sketched the millionaire as he stood waiting for his car on a Soho Street corner. He never noticed her. When she tapped his elbow and handed him the portrait, he smiled politely. Then he turned it over. On the back, she had written a single sentence in careful block letters. He read it, and the man who commanded a billion-dollar empire broke down and wept on the sidewalk. This is Maya, a 16-year-old deaf artist for whom the world is a silent film, and every face is a story waiting to be drawn. And this is Daniel Croft, a billionaire venture capitalist for whom every human interaction is a calculated transaction. Their worlds should never have collided. But in that 5-minute sketch, Maya saw something his boardroom, his partners, and his fortune could not. What did a deaf girl see in a stranger's eyes that his own reflection had hidden for decades? And what was written on that paper that shattered him? To understand that moment on the sidewalk, you must first understand the two parallel worlds that converged there. Maya Reyes was born profoundly deaf into a hearing family in the Bronx. For her, sound was not an absence, but a different kind of presence, a world of vibration, of intense visual detail, and of a language built by hands and eyes. Her mother, a school teacher, enrolled her in an American Sign Language immersion program at age 3. But it was her uncle, a graphic designer who lost his hearing in his 20s, who handed her a charcoal pencil at age 7 and showed her that paper could listen when the world would not. She didn't just draw faces, she documented souls. By 16, she had developed a singular talent honed not in art schools, but on subway platforms and park benches. She was a practitioner of Devia, deaf view image art, a movement born in the late 1980s where art is not just aesthetic, but a visual scream, a prayer, or a history told through symbols. Maya's symbols were the ones she saw every day, eyes wide with unheard stories, hands shaped into silent words, and mouths set in lines of unspoken fatigue. Her street portraits were her dialogue with a hearing world that often looked past her. Each sketch was a question, do you see me? And more importantly, can I see you? On the other side of the city, Daniel Croft built a fortress of numbers. The only child of a stern, emotionally distant financier, he learned early that affection was conditional and vulnerability was the one ledger that always ended in red. He mastered the algorithm of success, elite business school, ruthless early investments in tech startups, a mind that could see market patterns in chaos. By 42, he controlled a venture capital firm with assets over $2.3 billion. He lived in a 74th-floor penthouse that overlooked the city like a chessboard. He had everything the world told him to want, and he felt nothing at all. His personal life was a series of strategic alliances, a divorce settled with cold precision, social connections that were mere network nodes. His own reflection in the tower's glass was just another asset to manage. The psychological term for what Daniel experienced is emotional attenuation, a numbing of feeling as a defense mechanism. For him, every relationship was a transaction, every conversation a negotiation. He was, in the most profound sense, lonely at the top, but his brain, trained on risk assessment, interpreted this emptiness not as a cry for help, but as a sign of superior focus. The very wiring that made him a billionaire also walled him off from the human connections that give wealth its meaning. Maya's world was built on a different kind of intelligence. Deaf gain, a concept in deaf culture, posits that deafness is not a deficit, but a difference that brings unique cognitive strengths, enhanced visual attention, superior pattern recognition in faces, and a deep, intuitive reading of body language. Studies in neuroplasticity show that when one sense is absent, the brain rewires to heighten others. For Maya, a flicker in the corner of a mouth, a slight tension around the eyes, a barely perceptible sag in the shoulders, these were not subtle cues. They were bold, clear headlines of a person's inner state. She didn't hear the words people used to disguise themselves. She only saw the truth their bodies couldn't hide. That golden October afternoon was, for Daniel, a low-grade crisis. He had just walked out of a partner meeting where he'd been forced to vote to liquidate a failing biotech firm, putting 300 people out of work 2 weeks before Christmas. The logic was sound. The numbers were irrefutable. But as he stood on the corner of Green and Prince Streets waiting for his driver, the weight of that decision sat in his gut like a stone. He was not sad. He was, as his therapist would later suggest, emotionally constipated. The feeling was there, but it had no pathway out. He stared blankly at the traffic, his posture perfect, his suit impeccable, a monument to successful despair. Maya saw him from her usual spot by the wrought iron fence. She was finishing a sketch of an elderly flower vendor. She watched Daniel for 5 full minutes. She saw the absolute stillness of a man in emotional lockdown. She saw the way his eyes scanned the street but registered nothing, a look she recognized from her own moments of feeling trapped inside a silent body in a noisy world. But she also saw something else, something almost buried under the armor, a faint, habitual tug at the left corner of his lips, a ghost of a smile that his face remembered but his heart had long forgotten. She tore a fresh sheet from her pad. Her pencil began to move, not drawing the literal man in the $10,000 suit, but drawing the man underneath. She exaggerated nothing. Instead, she focused on the subtle details hearing people miss. The slight asymmetry of his brows that hinted at constant calculation, the elegant but tense lines of his neck, the curious softness in the depiction of his hands, which he drew not clenched, but open and slightly empty. In her deaf art tradition, the hands are everything, the means of creation, communication, and connection. She drew his as if they were waiting to hold something they had lost. When she approached, he didn't notice until her shadow crossed his phone's screen. He looked down, annoyed, then saw a teenage girl in a paint-stained smock. He reached for his wallet, assuming a charity pitch. She shook her head, handed him the portrait, and pointed first to the drawing, then to his face, then to her own eyes. Her message was clear, "I see you." Daniel looked at the sketch. It was undeniably him, but it was him as he might look after a long, good cry, the tension eased, the weariness acknowledged. It was unnervingly compassionate. He managed a tight, professional smile and nodded his thanks, pulling out a $100 bill. Maya shook her head again, pointed firmly at the back of the paper, gave a small wave and turned to walk away. Puzzled, Daniel flipped the sheet over. There in clean, block-letter print was a single line. He read it. His breath caught. The professional smile vanished. His face, for the first time in years, went completely slack with unguarded shock. The $100 bill fluttered from his fingers to the pavement. He looked up, desperately searching for the girl, but she was already gone, absorbed into the Saturday crowd. He stood there, a billionaire holding a piece of paper that had just detonated silently in his chest, utterly unaware that the message was only the beginning. What Maya had written was a key, and it was about to unlock a chain of events that would drag a hidden, painful history into the light, threatening the very empire he had sacrificed everything to build. The words she wrote were, "You look like someone who forgot how to be loved." For 20 minutes, Daniel Croft stood frozen on that Soho corner, the paper trembling in his hand. He was a man who controlled billion-dollar flows, yet he could not command his own lungs to take a full breath. Drivers honked. Pedestrians streamed around him. The world moved in fast forward while he was stuck on pause, replaying a sentence that felt less like an observation and more like a diagnosis. He hadn't cried in 15 years, not since his father's funeral, where he'd considered tears a tactical error. Now they came in hot, silent tracks down his cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. He was too busy remembering how to feel. He folded the sketch with the reverence of a holy text, placed it inside his suit jacket, directly over his heart. His driver, Marcus, pulled up and saw his boss's face. "Sir, are you unwell?" Daniel slid into the back seat, his voice rough. "Find her." He had no name, only a description. A teenage girl, light brown braids, paint-stained smock, deaf. They circled the block for an hour. She was gone. Daniel's command center mind, built for solving complex problems, had encountered a variable it could not compute, a profound, unasked-for kindness. That night, in his sterile penthouse, he propped the sketch against a $2 million sculpture. The art world would call the sculpture a masterpiece. He couldn't remember the artist's name. He would never forget Maya's. The following Monday, Daniel walked into Croft Capital and did something that sent a shockwave through the entire 18th floor. He canceled the liquidation of the biotech firm. He told his stunned partners he was injecting $5 million of his personal capital to restructure it, save the 300 jobs, and explore a humanitarian patent model. The numbers still didn't add up. It was, by every metric of his former self, an insane decision. His co-founder and longtime friend, Alexander Vance, followed him into his office, closing the soundproof door. "Dan, what the hell is this? We voted. The logic was airtight." Daniel stared out at the city, his back to Alex. The logic was wrong, he said quietly. We were measuring the wrong things. Meanwhile, Maya Reyes returned to her life, unaware of the earthquake she had triggered. She lived with her mother, Sophia, a second-grade teacher, in a small but vibrant apartment in the Bronx, its walls covered in Maya's art. For Maya, the interaction was just another Tuesday. She'd given away dozens of portraits with personal messages to a tired nurse, a grieving widow, a homeless veteran. It was her practice, her ministry. Her mother, who was hearing, had taught her that while the world might not always listen, it could always be shown how to see. Maya wrote the messages in English, her second language after ASL, choosing words with the same care she used to choose lines. She didn't know the man was a billionaire. She only knew he looked like a closed door. Daniel, however, could not let it go. He hired a discreet private investigation firm. Their directive, find the girl but do not approach her. He needed to understand the source of this devastating clarity. Within 48 hours, a dossier landed on his desk. Maya Reyes, age 16, profoundly deaf since birth, student at the Lexington School for the Deaf, prodigious talent, sold sketches on the street to supplement her mother's teacher salary. Her father was not in the picture. Daniel pored over the report, but it was the attached photographs of her other artwork that stunned him. Portraits of strangers, each capturing a haunting vulnerability. They were mirrors, not photographs, and then he saw it. In the corner of one drawing, a small recurring symbol, a stylized eye with a tear falling onto an open hand. He didn't know it was a classic Devia symbol representing the deaf experience of being seen but not heard. To him, it looked like grief. He had to see her again, but he couldn't just approach her. He was a 42-year-old man in a suit. She was a deaf miner on the street. Every protocol screamed danger. So he devised a plan that was, for him, utterly irrational. He told Marcus to drive him to the Bronx on a Saturday morning. He changed into plain jeans and a sweater, a costume that felt alien on him, and went to the park where the report said she sometimes drew. He saw her from across the lawn, sitting under an oak tree, sketchpad on her knees. He watched for an hour, a billion-dollar phantom learning her rhythm. He saw how people approached her, how she communicated with a notepad and a warm, open expression. His heart hammered with a fear no boardroom had ever inspired. Finally, he walked over. He knelt on the grass at a respectful distance, not to loom over her. She looked up, recognized him instantly, and her eyes widened, not with fear but with surprise and then a deep, thoughtful curiosity. He took out his own notepad and pen, the tools of his trade now repurposed for the most important negotiation of his life. He wrote, "Thank you for the portrait. It changed everything. Why did you write those words to me?" Maya read it, her face serene. She took the pen. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate. "Because it was true, your eyes are full of stories you never tell." Daniel read the sentence, and another piece of his armor cracked. He wrote back, "How can you see that?" Maya smiled a little, a sad, knowing smile. She wrote, "I don't hear the lies people tell with their voices. I only see the truth they tell with their bodies. Your body is very lonely." Daniel Croft, the titan of finance, sat back on the grass as if pushed. The simple, devastating accuracy of it left him winded. He wrote one more question, the core of his quest. "Can you teach me to see like that?" Maya studied him for a long time. Then she nodded once. She pointed to the empty space on the bench beside her, an invitation. It was the beginning of an unlikely, silent tutelage, but Daniel was navigating this fragile new connection with only half the story. He was so focused on the girl who saw his pain that he failed to notice the man who was methodically plotting to exploit it. Alexander Vance was not just a business partner, he was the yang to Daniel's yin. Where Daniel was the visionary, Alex was the operator, the one who handled the messy details and ensured the machine ran smoothly. He had also watched Daniel become emotionally absent for years, and he'd built contingencies. A secret clause in their partnership agreement, a competency trigger, allowed the board to force a buyout if a partner was deemed psychologically unfit. Alex had never dreamed of using it. But the biotech reversal was not an anomaly. Daniel was missing meetings. He was distracted. He'd hired a pie for a personal matter, which Alex had discovered through a back channel. The formidable, predictable Daniel Croft was becoming unstable, and in their world, instability was a virus that could wipe out fortunes. Alex made a call to a forensic psychiatrist on retainer, laying the groundwork. He began quietly collecting evidence: the cancelled liquidation, reports of Daniel wandering in the Bronx, the emotional episode witnessed by the driver. He was constructing a narrative of a breakdown, piece by piece, to present to the board. His goal wasn't malicious, he told himself, it was protective, to save the company from its founder. But the line between protection and a coup is razor-thin, and Alex was already stepping over it. Daniel, oblivious, kept his Saturday appointments in the park. He learned to sit in silence to watch. Maya taught him through notes and gestures to see the micro-expressions he'd always ignored, the false smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the nervous hand that seeks a pocket, the slight lean away from a disliked conversation. She was teaching him the grammar of human emotion. One afternoon, he wrote a question that had been burning in him. "Why do you do this? Give these portraits away." Maya's answer was simple. "My mom says the world is noisy, but not always kind. My hands are quiet, but can be kind. I want people to feel seen. Maybe then they will learn to see others." It was during the third Saturday that the pivot occurred, the revelation that reframed everything. A light rain began to fall. Maya gathered her things, and Daniel helped. As she zipped her backpack, a small laminated photograph fell out onto the wet grass. Daniel picked it up. It was a picture of a younger woman, beautiful, with kind eyes and a radiant smile, holding a baby. It was clearly Maya's mother, Sophia, but it was the background of the photo that stopped Daniel's heart. It was a familiar brick courtyard with a distinctive broken fountain. It was the courtyard of his alma mater, Columbia University, and the woman was wearing a sweater he recognized. It was the sweater of the literary society he'd been part of in his sophomore year. His blood ran cold. He pointed to the photo, then to Maya, a questioning look on his face. Maya nodded, smiling. She took the photo and pointed proudly to her mother, then made the sign for smart, then school. Daniel's mind was racing. Sophia Reyes, he knew that name. It was buried deep in the archives of a self he had erased. Sophia, he had known a Sophia, a fiery, brilliant scholarship student from the Bronx who worked in the library. They had been in that literary society together. They had been more than friends for one intense, passionate semester, until his father found out and told him to end it. "She's not from your world, Daniel. She's a distraction from your path." And he, the obedient heir, had broken it off with a coldness he now remembered with shame. He had never known what happened to her. He had never tried to find out. Now he was looking at her daughter. A timeline clicked into place with terrifying clarity. That semester was 24 years ago. Maya was 16. The math was possible, horrifyingly, devastatingly possible. He stared at Maya's face, really seeing it for the first time not as an artist's subject, but as a human being. The shape of the eyes, the curve of the brow. He saw not Sophia, but his own mother, whose portrait hung in his hallway, a resemblance he had been emotionally blind to for weeks. He wrote on the pad, his handwriting now unsteady. "Your mother, Sophia, did she go to Columbia?" Maya nodded, excited. She wrote back, "Yes, she loved it. She wanted to be a writer, then she had me. She became a teacher instead. She says it's better." The noble sacrifice stated as simple fact. Daniel felt the ground dissolve beneath him. The universe had not sent a random angel. It had sent a living, breathing consequence, a reckoning in a paint-stained smock. He made an excuse, left the park, and in the privacy of his car, he vomited onto the curb. The pieces were aligning into a picture more terrifying than any corporate takeover. He might have a daughter. He had abandoned her mother, and by extension her, and he had been so emotionally atrophied that he needed her to draw him a picture to even begin to feel the weight of that sin. The irony was a knife in his gut, but the true crisis was yet to unfold. Because Alexander Vance, monitoring Daniel's movements, had just received a surveillance photo from a hired tail. It showed Daniel Croft, in the rain in the Bronx, handing a piece of paper to a teenage girl. The context was invisible. The implication was explosive. Alex now had the final piece for his narrative: inappropriate, unexplained contact with a minor. He picked up the phone to schedule the emergency board meeting. The trap was set. And Daniel, drowning in a sea of personal revelation, had no idea the professional execution was already scheduled for 9 a.m. Monday. The weekend was a 48-hour panic attack disguised as a man. Daniel spent it in a vortex of research and dread. He pulled every record, every yearbook, every digital trace of Sophia Reyes. He confirmed it, the brilliant, beautiful sophomore from his literature seminar, the one he'd taken to the winter formal, the one he'd left behind without a proper goodbye. He found her professional profile: Sophia Reyes, MS in education, dedicated teacher at PS 148 in the Bronx. Single mother, No mention of a father for Maya on any record. His lawyer, a sharp, unflappable woman named Evelyn Reed, arrived at the penthouse on Sunday evening. Daniel laid out the facts, leaving nothing out: the portrait, the meetings, the photo, the timeline. Evelyn listened, her face a mask of professional calm. When he finished, she said, "Daniel, from a legal standpoint, you have two immediate fires. First, paternity. If you believe this young woman is your biological child, that is a matter for a DNA test and potentially the family court. But it's the second fire that will burn your house down by lunchtime tomorrow. Your partners think you're having a psychological break and are meeting to trigger the competency clause. The surveillance photos with the girl are their smoking gun." Daniel felt the trap snap shut around him. He had been so focused on the emotional bomb, he'd neglected the financial one. "What's the play, Evelyn?" She leaned forward. "You walk into that boardroom at 9 a.m. and you do not lead with your heart. You lead with the numbers from the biotech turnaround, which, by the way, I had my team analyze. There's a viable path to profitability if you pivot to rare disease therapeutics. The numbers are salvageable. You present that. You are calm, collected, strategic. You dismiss the personal distraction as due diligence on a potential philanthropic art initiative for deaf youth. You lie, Daniel, beautifully. And then, after you secure your company, you deal with the possible daughter you abandoned." It was sound advice. It was the old Daniel Croft playbook, but the old Daniel Croft was the man who had created this mess. At 2 a.m. he was staring at Maya's portrait when his phone buzzed. An unknown number, a text message. "Mr. Croft, this is Sophia Reyes, Maya's mother. We need to talk now." The message felt like a live wire in his hand. She knew. How did she know? He typed back, his fingers clumsy. "How did you get this number?" The reply was instant. "You're a famous man." It wasn't hard. The coffee shop on 116th and Broadway, 1 hour. The meeting was a surreal collision of past and present. Sophia looked older, of course, but the intelligence in her eyes was brighter, hardened by years of single motherhood. She did not smile. She sat across from him in the quiet cafe, holding a steaming mug between her hands like a shield. "Maya told me about the kind man in the park who learns to see," she began, her voice low and controlled. "She showed me his picture from her phone. I almost dropped my coffee, Daniel. Or should I call you Mr. Croft now?" "Daniel is fine," he said, his voice thick. "Sophia, there are no words for how sorry I am." She cut him off with a sharp shake of her head. "Save it. I'm not here for an apology from 2 decades ago. I'm here because my daughter is involved now. She is a minor. She is also deaf, which in the eyes of many people makes her vulnerable. You are a billionaire having secret meetings with her in parks. Do you have any idea how that looks?" Daniel flinched. "It wasn't like that. I was trying to understand the portrait she gave me." Sophia's eyes flashed. "I know about the portrait. You look like someone who forgot how to be loved. She's written similar things to others. It's her gift. She sees the core of people, but you took it personally. You inserted yourself into her life." Why? The question hung in the air. Daniel knew the true answer. The paternity suspicion was a landmine. He couldn't step on it yet. Not without proof, not with the board meeting looming. "I was moved," he said, choosing his words like navigating a field of glass. "I've lived a life of numbers. She showed me something human. I wanted to learn from it, from her." Sophia studied him, her gaze as penetrating as her daughter's. "You haven't changed. You're still packaging a feeling into a project. She's not a corporate training seminar, Daniel. She's a child." The accusation was fair and it strung. He was doing exactly that. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, defeated. Sophia sighed, the anger softening into a profound weariness. "I want you to leave her alone, for good. Your world is not safe for her. Your interest could be misconstrued in ways that could hurt her socially, legally. You have no idea the scrutiny we're under already just trying to get her the services she needs." Daniel felt a door slam shut in his face, the one source of light he'd found, and he was being told to wall it off. "And if I can't do that," he whispered. Sophia's face went pale. "Then I will get a restraining order, and I will tell every news outlet that will listen that Daniel Croft is harassing a deaf teenager. Do you understand?" He understood perfectly. It was a checkmate move. She was protecting her cub, and she would use his own public stature as a weapon against him. He nodded, a slow, heavy acknowledgement. "I understand." As he stood to leave, Sophia spoke again, her voice barely audible. "For what it's worth, she liked you. She said you had sad hands that wanted to be gentle." Daniel walked out into the cold night, feeling more alone than he ever had in his empty penthouse. Monday morning, 9 a.m., the boardroom. The air was pressurized with tension. Alexander Vance sat at the head of the table, the other 5 board members arrayed around him. Daniel entered last. He wore his armor, the $5,000 suit, the steely gaze. He placed his tablet on the table. "Alex, board members, I understand there are concerns. Let's address them." Alex launched immediately, cool and clinical. He presented a timeline: the erratic biotech decision, the missed meetings, the secretive hiring of investigators, and finally the photos. He displayed them on the screen, Daniel in the park handing a note to Maya, Daniel kneeling beside her. "Who is this girl, Daniel?" Alex asked, his tone implying the worst. "And why are you, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar fund, having clandestine meetings with her?" Every eye was on Daniel. This was the moment. He could follow Evelyn's script. He could lie. He took a breath, and then he did something utterly unexpected. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out Maya's portrait. He slid it to the center of the polished table. "Her name is Maya Reyes," he said, his voice clear and calm. "She is a 16-year-old deaf artist of extraordinary talent. She gave me this portrait 2 weeks ago." On the back, she wrote a message that fundamentally altered my perspective. My erratic decision regarding Genodyne Biotech was a direct result of that perspective shift. I believe we can do better than being mere vultures of capital. The due diligence from my team, he nodded to a folder Evelyn had prepared, shows a 70% chance of ROI within 5 years if we pivot the model. As for the meetings, I sought her out to thank her, and then to learn. She is teaching me to see human context, which is a skill this firm has sorely neglected. The room was dead silent. Alex looked stunned, then furious. "You're joking? You're risking our reputation, our fiduciary duty for art therapy?" Daniel locked eyes with him. "No, Alex, I'm realigning our purpose. And if the board feels my new perspective constitutes incompetence, then you are welcome to call a vote." It was a breathtaking gamble. He was calling their bluff, reframing his vulnerability as visionary strength. Before Alex could respond, the door to the boardroom opened. Evelyn Reed walked in, followed by a man no one recognized. "Forgive the interruption," Evelyn said smoothly, "but this is Mr. David Chen, a licensed investigator. He has information pertinent to today's discussion regarding surveillance." Alex paled. Daniel hadn't been idle over the weekend. While researching Sophia, he'd also had Evelyn dig into who was tailing him. David Chen laid a file on the table. "Surveillance on Mr. Croft was commissioned by a shell corporation, which our trace indicates is ultimately funded by a private equity firm called Vortex Capital." He paused, letting the name sink in. Vortex Capital was their most aggressive competitor. "It appears," Chen continued, "that the intention was to gather compromising material on Mr. Croft to facilitate a hostile takeover bid for Croft Capital's most lucrative holdings." All heads swiveled to Alex. The narrative shattered and reformed in an instant. Alex wasn't just a concerned partner staging a coup. He was a mole, or at the very least, his actions had played directly into a competitor's hands. The photos weren't just evidence of Daniel's instability, they were ammunition for an enemy. Alex stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "That's a lie. I had no idea who was behind the surveillance firm I hired. I was trying to protect the company." But the doubt was now a chasm in the room. Daniel had just turned the tables. He had exposed a greater threat, using Alex's own weapon against him. The meeting devolved into chaos. The vote was tabled. Alex was suspended pending an internal investigation. Daniel had won the battle, but as he returned to his office, the victory tasted like ash. He had saved his company by being more ruthless, more cunning. He had become the old Daniel to protect the new one's chance to exist. And in doing so, he had likely destroyed a 20-year friendship and agreed to sever contact with the girl who might be his daughter. He was back on top of a mountain of his own making, and it felt like a prison. His phone rang. It was his head of security. "Sir, we have a situation. A reporter from the Financial Chronicle is asking for comment on a tip they received. The tip alleges you are the biological father of a deaf teenage street artist and are attempting to buy her silence." The world tilted. Someone was pulling a different string. This wasn't Alex. Alex was too smart to go to the press with something so salacious and legally fraught. This was someone else, someone who knew about Sophia. Someone who wanted to burn his life to the ground in the public square. And as that realization dawned, another call came in, this time from a blocked number. A digitally altered voice whispered through the speaker, "You should have just written a check, Croft. Now everyone gets to see the picture." The line went dead. The final war was not in the boardroom. It was about to be waged on the front page of every tabloid, and the casualty would not be his fortune, but an innocent 16-year-old girl and the mother he had once loved. The anonymous threat was a precision strike. Within 2 hours, the whispers were a roar. Online finance forums buzzed. Gossip columns lit up with veiled references to a top-tier VC and a mysterious muse. Daniel's public relations team went to DEFCON 1, but this wasn't a standard scandal to be managed with a sterile statement. This was a live nerve exposed to the world, and it was attached to 2 innocent people. He thought of Sophia's warning, "Your world is not safe for her," and felt a surge of nauseating guilt. He had done this. His desire for connection had painted a target on their backs. His first call was to Evelyn Reed. "We contain it. We sue everyone," she began. Daniel interrupted, his voice terrifyingly calm. "No, we do the opposite. We tell the truth, all of it." Evelyn was silent for a full 5 seconds. "Daniel, that is professional and personal suicide. You'll be a laughingstock. The board will finally have real cause to remove you." "Maybe," he said, "but if I fight this with lies and lawyers, they get hurt. If I tell the truth, I'm the only one who gets burned." It was the first truly selfless calculation of his life. He called Sophia. She answered on the first ring, her voice strained with panic. "Reporters are outside my building, Daniel. They're shouting questions about Maya. What did you do?" "I'm sorry," he said, the words utterly inadequate. "Someone is trying to destroy me and they're using you to do it. I have a plan, but I need your permission, and I need a DNA test." The line was so quiet he thought she'd hung up. Then a choked sob. "You think she's yours?" It wasn't a question. "The timeline fits, Sophia, and when I look at her, I see my mother. I need to know. She deserves to know." Sophia's response surprised him. "The test? Yes, for Maya's sake we need to know, but your plan, what is it?" Daniel took a deep breath. "I'm holding a press conference. Today I'm going to tell the story, the portrait, the message, what it made me see about my own life. And I am going to publicly acknowledge that I am pursuing a paternity test because I believe I may be Maya's father, and that if I am, I will embrace that responsibility fully and publicly. I will take the heat, the ridicule, everything. It will all be on me. You and Maya will be framed as what you are, remarkable people who showed a lost man a mirror." Sophia cried quietly, "You'll ruin yourself. A self that deserves ruining," Daniel replied. "Will you let me do this?" After a long pause, she whispered, "Yes." At 4 p.m. that afternoon, in the atrium of Croft Capital, a place usually reserved for announcing billion-dollar funds, Daniel Croft faced a sea of cameras. He looked exhausted, vulnerable, and completely resolute. He did not read from a teleprompter. He spoke from the folded, worn piece of paper he held in his hand, Maya's portrait. He told the story. He described the moment on the sidewalk, the shocking clarity of the message. He spoke of his emotional numbness, his robotic existence. He admitted to seeking out the artist, a 16-year-old deaf girl named Maya Reyes, not for any improper reason, but to learn from her unique way of seeing. He confessed his own past relationship with Sophia Reyes and the painful, cowardly way he had ended it. And then, he dropped the bombshell he knew would dominate every headline. "I believe there is a significant possibility that Maya Reyes is my biological daughter. A paternity test has been arranged. If she is my child, I will spend the rest of my life making up for my absence. My primary concern now is not my reputation or my company, but protecting Maya and her mother from the circus my life has become." The room exploded in flashbulbs and shouted questions. He ignored them, holding up the portrait for a final moment. "This young woman, who the world might dismiss because she doesn't hear, sees more clearly than anyone I've ever met. She asked me a question with this drawing that I had been asking myself for 20 years. The question was, who are you when no one is watching? I didn't like the answer. I am trying to become a better one." He walked off the stage, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. The fallout was immediate and volcanic. The financial press called it a spectacular meltdown. Croft Capital's stock in its publicly traded holdings dipped 8% in after-hours trading. The board was apoplectic. Alex, from his suspension, watched with a mixture of horror and grim satisfaction. The competitor, Vortex Capital, saw an opening and began making predatory calls to Croft's biggest investors. Daniel had voluntarily stepped onto a grenade. But a strange thing happened in the court of public opinion. While the finance world scorned him, a broader audience saw something else. a powerful man publicly humbling himself, admitting fault, and choosing family over facade. The story of the deaf artist and the billionaire's portrait went viral. Maya's Instagram, where she quietly posted her art, gained 500,000 followers in a day. Comments flooded in praising her talent and her courage. The narrative began to subtly shift from scandal to a modern-day parable. 3 days later, in a private lab, the results came. Daniel, Sophia, and Maya waited together in a small, neutral room. The genetic counselor entered with an envelope. Maya, sensing the profound tension, looked at Daniel, then at her mother, and signed a single word, "Family." Sophia signed back, "We will see." The counselor handed the report to Sophia. She opened it, her hands trembling. Her eyes scanned the page, welled with tears, and she looked up at Daniel. She didn't need to speak. The answer was written in the profound relief and sorrow on her face. Daniel Croft was, with 99.9% certainty, Maya's biological father. Daniel felt the world lurch. The confirmation was a physical blow. He turned to Maya, who was watching them intently. He picked up the notepad they always used. He wrote, "The test says I am your father. I am so sorry I was not there. I would like to be in your life if you will let me." Maya read it. She didn't smile or cry. She became very still, her artist's mind processing this new reality. Then she picked up her own pen. "I always wondered who he was. I thought he was a bad man who didn't want me, but you came back. You cried on the street. That's not a bad man. That's a sad man who forgot. You can stay." Daniel broke. He wept openly, great heaving sobs that came from a place deeper than he knew existed. Sophia cried with him, 2 decades of struggle and loneliness finally acknowledged. And Maya, the quiet center of the storm, simply reached out and took one of each of their hands, completing a circuit that had been broken for 16 years. The corporate battle, however, was not over. With Daniel publicly unstable, the board moved swiftly. They called an emergency vote to invoke the competency clause and install Alexander Vance as interim CEO. The vote was scheduled for the following Monday. Daniel prepared to lose everything he'd built. He spent the weekend not in his office, but with Sophia and Maya, learning the basics of American Sign Language, the rhythms of their life. He discovered a happiness that was quiet and real, devoid of trophies. On Monday morning, as the board assembled, they found an unexpected visitor in the conference room. Sophia Reyes with Maya beside her. Daniel had not brought them, they had insisted on coming. Sophia addressed the room of powerful, skeptical men and women. "You're here to decide if Daniel Croft is fit to lead," she said, her teacher's voice clear and firm. "You have charts about his erratic behavior. Let me show you his real ledger." She gestured to Maya, who opened a large portfolio. Inside were not financial statements, but Daniel's homework, his clumsy, earnest attempts to sketch, to see as she had taught him. And at the front was the original portrait. "He is learning," Sophia said. "For the first time in his adult life, he is learning something that isn't about money. He is learning empathy. He is learning to be a father. If that makes him unfit to run a company that only values the opposite of those things, then maybe the company is the problem." Maya then stepped forward and placed a single, new drawing on the table. It was a sketch of the boardroom, but not as it was. In her drawing, the people were connected by glowing lines, not of data, but of light. At the head of the table, Daniel was drawn not as a CEO, but as a bridge. The board was speechless. The raw, undeniable humanity in the room was a force their spreadsheets couldn't quantify. The vote was called, and in a stunning reversal, the competency motion failed, not because Daniel had dazzled them with a new business plan, but because a public school teacher and a deaf artist had shown them what real value looked like. Alexander Vance resigned on the spot. Daniel kept his company, but he transformed it. He established the Croft Reyes Foundation, funding deaf arts education and rare disease research, with Maya as its youth ambassador. He stepped back from day-to-day operations, becoming chairman and focusing on impact investing. He moved out of the penthouse and into a modest brownstone near Sophia and Maya, not because he had to, but because he wanted to hear the sounds of a family life he was finally part of. And here is the final, surprising detail. A year after the sidewalk portrait, Maya's drawing of Daniel, the one that started it all, was requested for a major exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art. It was to be featured in a showcase on Devia Deaf View Image Art. The curator asked Maya for a title. She didn't title it based on the man or the moment. She titled it based on the message, and the transformation it sparked. The piece was displayed in a hall of masterpieces, a simple charcoal sketch on worn paper. The placard read, "Portrait of a man remembering how to be loved." And in the artist's statement, Maya wrote just one line in ASL gloss, translated below, "I drew the door. He was brave enough to walk through it." Daniel Croft, the man who forgot, had finally been remembered, not by his fortune, but by a truth told in silence and seen in a few careful lines on a piece of paper. The journey from that sidewalk to this moment was not about a billionaire finding a daughter or an artist finding a father. It was about two lonely people, in their own separate silences, teaching each other how to speak the language of the heart. The story of a sketch and a sentence is more than a viral moment or a family reunited. It is a case study in a different kind of intelligence, one that our noise-drenched, transactional world often dismisses until it becomes our only lifeline. Daniel Croft had mastered the language of markets, but was illiterate in the language of the human heart. Maya Reyes, living in a world of silence, was fluent in it. Her deafness was not a limitation in this exchange. It was the prerequisite for her profound clarity. She represented what deaf culture calls deaf gain, the unique cognitive, cultural, and creative benefits that arise from being deaf. In a room full of shouting lies, the person who cannot hear the shouting is the one who can best see the truth. We all build fortresses. Ours are made of business, of accomplishment, of the curated personas we show online. We believe these walls protect us, when in reality, they only imprison us in a quieter, more desperate kind of loneliness. We become like Daniel, successful, admired, and utterly unknown, even to ourselves. The tragedy is not that no one sees us. The tragedy is that we have made it impossible for anyone to see. But the universe has a quiet, persistent way of sending messengers. They rarely look like what we expect. They are not grand interventions. They are subtle, almost missed connections. A stranger's glance that holds a moment too long, a friend's question that cuts a little deeper than usual, a piece of art that seems to speak directly to a hidden wound, or a portrait from a deaf girl on a busy street. These messengers don't force their way through our walls. They simply hand us a mirror and wait for us to look. The lingering question this story leaves us with is not about Daniel or Maya. It is about you. What is your fortress made of? What persona have you constructed that has now become your prison? And more importantly, who are the messengers you have been trained to ignore? The quiet coworker, the observant child, the artist on the street corner, your own intuition whispering in a moment of stillness. We dismiss them because their language isn't the loud, logical currency of our daily grind. But they are the only ones speaking the truth we most need to hear. Redemption is not a distant, celestial event. It is a mundane, available choice. It is the courage to accept the mirror when it is offered. It is the willingness to be shattered by a simple truth, and then to begin the slow, painful, beautiful work of reassembling yourself into someone real. Daniel Croft did not find grace at the top of a mountain of money. He found it kneeling on a city sidewalk, weeping over a sentence written on the back of a drawing. The path back to ourselves is always humbling. It always requires surrendering the armor we thought was our strength. Maya's final lesson is the most powerful of all. You do not need to hear to listen. You do not need to speak to communicate a truth that can change a life. Sometimes, the most profound dialogues happen in total silence, between a willing heart and a seeing eye. The next time you feel unseen, remember that the power to see others with compassion is the very key that can unlock the door to being seen yourself. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who might need a reminder that it's never too late to be found. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to join us for more journeys into the human heart. Until next time.